What if I told you that the person who changed the course of humanity is still almost completely ignored to this day? Would you believe it? Well, the biblical tradition tried to erase the name of Adah, but God never forgot her. While the world became intoxicated with kings, wars, and conquests, it was in the quiet hands of this forgotten woman that culture, music, and the building of communities were born. It's a hard truth. History is often written by those who shout the loudest, not by those who hold everything together in silence. Adah is living proof that the greatest heroes aren't always under the spotlight. And what few people realize is that there's something in her legacy that could transform your life today, faster and more powerfully than you might imagine. Get ready, because understanding Adah's story is like finding a hidden map that can help you rebuild the strength the modern world is trying to steal from you. And here's a heads up. At the end of this journey, I've prepared a powerful prayer to renew your faith, your strength, and your purpose. So stay with me until the very end. You won't want to miss this divine connection. Think you know the Bible? Think again. What you're about to discover may completely change the way you view your roots, your faith, and what true greatness really means. Let's dive into this forgotten mystery together. When the dust of creation was still settling over the earth, Adah emerged. A woman few remember, yet she carried in her veins the quiet strength capable of shaping civilizations. In a time without kings, without cities, when primitive humanity was still searching for its way, she walked between chaos and creation. Genesis 4:19 mentions her only briefly, almost like a whisper in time. Yet it was in the invisible that Adah made history. Her silent legacy was destined to outlast the centuries. Anyone who looks closely at ancient culture will see the fingerprints of this woman erased by tradition. Few stop to think that the origins of civilization, the very one we now build with skyscrapers and smartphones, began in the attentive gaze of Adah. She didn't need armies or a crown. It was enough for her to live with spiritual resilience while everything around her was falling apart. Just imagine, in the midst of a raw, lawless world, she chose to stand firm. A modern-day example? Sometimes staying steady in a toxic environment is more revolutionary than waving a flag, like when you choose to cultivate peace at work, even among difficult colleagues. The biblical story of Adah is a living lesson that true transformation doesn't happen with shouting, but through consistent acts of quiet faith. While the men in Cain's line were drunk with power and blood, Adah was planting spiritual markers that not even Eden's fall could erase. It's just like today. In a world filled with digital noise, it's those who build in silence who truly change the game. If you want to create something lasting, remember, deep roots aren't grown with applause, they're grown with consistency. It's curious that the Bible barely speaks of her, yet Adah's impact spreads like invisible wind, touching, moving, renewing. It's like those people who change an entire company just by acting ethically and wisely, not with speeches, but by changing the atmosphere. And here's the wild part. In ancient culture, where names meant destiny, the simple fact that she was mentioned was a profound tribute to her strength. So even without her name engraved on monuments, Adah paved paths that would endure for ages. Her story challenges us to reflect, what are we building in the silence of our journey? And in the rough simplicity of her era, this forgotten woman teaches us that the power to transform the world often comes from what no one sees. But this story is only just beginning, because beside Adah stood a man named Lamech, whose choices would shape the destiny of generations. Lamech, Adah's husband, in his hunger for power, shattered the sacred patterns established since Eden, Genesis 4:19. He took for himself 2 wives, introducing a division that would echo through future generations. For Adah, there was no manual, no biblical precedent to show her how to survive such heartbreak. It was like walking today in a relationship where promises are broken without warning. The woman forgotten by history didn't just endure, she planted the seeds of humanity in broken ground. While Lamech embodied unrestrained ambition, Adah personified spiritual resilience. Her quiet strength didn't come from fiery speeches, but from steady actions that held together what could have fallen apart. Think of people who, even in failing businesses or broken families, become the invisible pillars keeping everything standing. This woman, nearly erased from history, was planting the seeds of civilization, while others chose to build castles in the sand. It's no exaggeration to say that Adah was the cornerstone of community building. She endured, she persisted, and she gave life, even where life seemed unwilling to bloom. Maybe you're living something similar right now, holding up a family, a project, or a dream without recognition. If that's the case, remember Adah. Just like her, every small act of yours could be the foundation for something that may one day transform generations. And in the midst of that brutal setting, where the fall of Eden still echoed through every thorn of the earth, Genesis 3:18, Adah didn't just survive, she built. Every day she endured was a silent defiance against growing chaos. Like that person who, even surrounded by bad influences, chooses to nurture character and dignity because they know that true fruit takes time to ripen. But what's most fascinating is that from this deeply unequal union, something extraordinary would be born. From her womb would come men who would change the course of ancient culture, not through war, but through creation and art. And here the story takes a breathtaking leap, opening the way for something no one expected: the rise of the innovators, Jabal and Jubal. From the heart of Adah's resilience came two living landmarks of human transformation: Jabal and Jubal. While many sought power through brute force, her sons sowed seeds of culture and progress. Jabal, described in Genesis 4:20, was the first to domesticate animals and live in tents, a radical innovation in a world of wandering hunters. Can you imagine? In a time when survival meant running, he chose to settle, to build, to plant roots. It's the modern-day equivalent of someone leaving the rat race to build a business that creates lasting impact. On the other hand, Jubal emerged as an unexpected flame in the desert of brutality. According to Genesis 4:21, he became the father of all who play the harp and flute, bringing music to the world for the first time in the Bible. In a primitive humanity thirsty for conquest, he offered something that couldn't be measured in land or spoils: the soulful beauty that connects spirit and emotion. How amazing is that? Jubal gave rhythm to chaos, just like today, when a song can soothe hearts in the middle of an emotional battlefield. These sons didn't merely survive, they created, innovated, and redefined what it meant to live. Jabal planted the concept of permanence. Jubal breathed art into the winds of history. And all of it happened because a forgotten woman, a quiet force, chose to resist while everything around her crumbled. How can we apply this today? When life screams at you to run, maybe that's the moment to stop, listen to the wind, and create something that transcends time. If we have civilizations, cities, celebrations, and songs today, we owe a part of that to Adah's anonymous courage. The domestication of animals and the creation of the first musical instruments came from her silent fruit. Think about that. Every time you hear a song that moves you or finds shelter in a safe home, there's an invisible thread linking you to the story of this woman, forgotten by biblical tradition, but forever marked by God's message. And while Jabal and Jubal danced between tents and melodies, something dark was quietly spreading around them. Arrogance, the thirst for power, and the corruption of Cain's lineage were never far. And Adah, with watchful eyes and a vigilant soul, would witness the fall of her time and the beginning of a new silent battle. As time passed, Lamech revealed a new face of Cain's line: brutal arrogance and a thirst for domination. In Genesis 4:23-24, his words pour out pride and violence like a poisoned river. While many celebrated this so-called strength, Adah, with her silent faith, saw that silence was the true shield. It's just like today. When the world applauds shouting and showmanship, few realize that real strength is continuing on without losing your essence. Amid all that corruption, Adah became an invisible rock. She wasn't trying to compete for attention. She persisted in love, in creation, in consistency. A practical example: when you see people at work playing dirty to get ahead, but you choose to stay ethical, knowing your reward will come in due time. That's how Adah lived. And it's this kind of spiritual resilience that still echoes through the roots of humanity. Lamech, on the other hand, embodied the very image of Eden's fall, a soul deformed by vanity, blind to the fact that true greatness is never built by crushing others. In contrast, Adah, with her invisible legacy, was building something far more enduring. It's the classic lesson of the Chinese bamboo: years of invisible growth, only to shoot up meters in just a few months. She knew that what is eternal is never immediate. The spiritual scars of that time ran deep. Every word Lamech spoke was a brick in the construction of a primitive humanity disconnected from God. And Adah, our Adah, stood like a silent watchtower among the ruins of what had once been promise. Maybe you've lived something like this, when everyone seems to have lost their way, and you're the one called to keep the faith. If so, then you already carry something of this forgotten woman's soul within you. And even in this suffocating atmosphere, the story didn't stop. What seemed like the end was, in truth, just another chapter in God's grand narrative. Because behind the scenes of violence, in the murmur of the instruments her sons created, and in the earth's own sighs, Adah began to sense something changing, and she would soon witness the transformation of the world itself. Adah, with her steady gaze and quiet strength, lived through a time when even the ground seemed to cry out in pain. Crops rotted before ripening, the wind danced in strange circles, and unsettling sounds echoed among the stones, signs that the earth was no longer the same. Just like today, as we see nature reacting to humanity's wounds, Adah witnessed a primitive world that was, day by day, forgetting its sacred roots. And still there she was, steady, silent, looking to the heavens for God's message. While the world crumbled around her, Adah wasn't seeking crowds or recognition. She remained like a small flame in a raging wind, a spark of hope in dark times. What's the practical takeaway? When modern anxiety tries to take over, small daily acts of faith, like expressing gratitude, meditating, or simply walking through nature, are the invisible anchors that keep us grounded. Adah was that anchor in her day. Genesis doesn't detail Adah's thoughts, but you can read them between the lines. She felt the absence of Eden in every breath. Genesis 3:23-24. And even without recorded words, she responded to the world's pain with spiritual resistance, as if refusing to forget that light still exists, even when everything looks dark. It reminds me of those today who continue to fight for dignity amid inequality, not under spotlights, but with real power. Ancient culture appeared to be advancing, new tools, cities emerging, innovations taking shape. But Adah knew something essential was being lost. Isn't it the same today? With all the technology at our fingertips, we often forget the simple virtues that sustain a meaningful life. Respect, gratitude, faith. Adah saw it too, civilization rushing forward, yet spiritually walking backward. And it was in this setting of hidden wounds and nearly extinguished hopes that Adah began to sense something deeper in the air. Something invisible was moving, something beyond the reach of ordinary senses. It wasn't just the land that was changing. It was as if destiny itself were holding its breath, preparing to reveal something that would shift the course of history. And Adah, as always, would be the silent witness to that moment. One heavy afternoon, when the sky seemed to breathe sadness, Adah saw what many would never believe. A line of fire cut across the horizon. But it wasn't ordinary fire. It was alive, pulsing, almost aware. In the midst of this supernatural spectacle, a figure began to form. As described between the lines of the biblical narrative, Genesis 4:19-24. Can you imagine witnessing something like that? In modern times, it would be like noticing subtle signs amid the world's frantic noise, something only those who cultivate quiet faith can understand. The presence of that being, with eyes like eternal abysses, left Adah frozen in place. But instead of fear, she felt a deep recognition. God's message was being carved right there, into the earth and into her soul. It's like those rare moments today when, in the middle of the chaos, something pulls us and whispers, "Pay attention. This is bigger than you." Anyone who's had an unexplainable spiritual experience knows it's not hallucination, it's pure revelation. The symbol engraved in the soil, according to biblical tradition, wasn't something that could be erased by footsteps or rain. It was a silent reminder that despite the growing corruption, God was still moving the pieces. Like invisible tattoos left on the soul after great transformations, Adah now knew nothing would ever be the same again. And primitive humanity, though blind, was about to be swept into changes that would come like a storm. And still, Adah didn't shout, didn't run to warn anyone. She returned to her daily routine, preparing the clay, tending to her work, while the world around her, unaware, marched toward the inevitable. It's a powerful lesson for us today. Not every divine calling is meant to be broadcast. Some are meant to be carried in silence until the right time. If you've ever felt a deep sense of purpose no one else understands, perhaps you're carrying the same kind of spiritual mark that once touched Adah. But the changes wouldn't end there. Time still had its cards to play, and Adah, the woman forgotten by tradition but remembered by heaven, would continue to be the invisible thread linking what seemed like ruin to the hope yet to come. As the centuries passed like relentless rivers, Adah's name nearly vanished from history's pages. But God, who sees what man overlooks, kept alive the memory of the one who became a root in the wilderness. Genesis 4:19 barely mentions her name, yet what she built still pulses through time. The origin of civilization, the first music in the Bible, culture that bloomed from dry ground. Just like in real life, the greatest pillars are often invisible to hurried eyes. Adah never chased the glory so many pursue. While Lamech shouted for vengeance and power, she remained firm in her spiritual resistance. Picture that grandmother no one mentions at family gatherings, but who quietly sustained generations with her prayers and gentle actions. That's the kind of quiet strength that moves the world without fanfare. And Adah was a master in this divine art of perseverance. In ancient culture, where kings were immortalized with monuments and heroes were sung about, Adah built something that couldn't fit in a statue, an invisible, indestructible legacy. When you see someone today who silently transforms lives, teachers, caregivers, anonymous leaders, you're witnessing the spiritual heirs of this woman forgotten by tradition. Whoever says only what's visible has value has never understood how true history is written. And in the end, between Eden's fall and the hope that would one day come through Noah, Adah remained the silent bridge between pain and redemption. Her role, crucial, her mission, fulfilled with invisible excellence. If today there are seeds of faith, music, culture, and community scattered across the world, it's because one simple woman once chose to be steadfast, even without applause. How can you bring this to your daily life? Be that root, firm where others want to uproot, planting hope where only doubt exists. But the story doesn't end here. Something even more powerful is yet to be revealed. Because sometimes, what was forgotten by men is exactly what God chose to leave an eternal mark on the heart of humanity. Today, together, we've crossed centuries of silence to rediscover Adah, the woman the world forgot, but whom God never abandoned. And if you've come this far, it's because that same spark of faith that survives the storms of time also lives in you. May her story inspire you to become a firm root in the midst of the desert, a silent breath of hope in a world so loud. Lord God Almighty, thank you for revealing to us that true strength is not found in what is seen, but in what endures. May every person who heard this story be strengthened in the invisible battles of life. May we, like Adah, be resilience in the silence, faith in the midst of pain, and roots that sustain generations. Mark our hearts with your divine seal and give us wisdom to build, even when everything seems to fall apart. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for walking with me through this powerful and revelation-filled biblical journey. It was an honor to share this story with you. If you want to keep receiving impactful stories like this, stories that awaken, transform, and strengthen, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss a single journey that heaven has yet to reveal to us. May God bless you powerfully. See you in the next video.